The sound of 12-gauge shotguns shattered the calm of Beverly Hills that August night. It was a blast, so violent, so sudden, it turned a mansion of wealth and privilege into a crime scene dripping with horror. In the living room of their multi-million-dollar estate, Jose and Kitty Menendez lay dead, their bodies torn apart by a rain of buckshot. But the killers weren't intruders. They weren't masked strangers or mob hitmen. They were their own sons, Lyall and Eric Menendez, young men who seemed to have everything, yet chose to commit one of the most infamous crimes in American history. To understand what happened, you first need to know the family behind the headlines. Jose Menendez was a Cuban immigrant, a self-made millionaire who clawed his way into the American dream. He was driven, ruthless, and obsessed with success. In the corporate world, he was respected for his sharp mind, but at home, the same relentless hunger for control often turned dark. His wife, Kitty, once a beauty queen and devoted mother, slowly unraveled under the pressures of his ambition and their troubled household. By the time the 1980s drew to a close, their home life was a storm of simmering conflict, whispered allegations, and unspoken fear. The Menendez brothers, Lyall and Eric, grew up in the shadow of their father's iron grip. Lyall, the elder, was brash, charismatic, and often arrogant. Eric was quieter, more sensitive, with a passion for tennis that nearly carried him to a professional career. Together, they seemed like typical rich kids of Beverly Hills, expensive clothes, fast cars, and every opportunity at their fingertips. But beneath the surface, resentment brewed. Friends and relatives would later describe a household of pressure, control, and dysfunction. What no one could imagine was that these two boys would take up weapons and unleash unspeakable violence on the very people who gave them life. On the night of August 20th, 1989, the family gathered in their Beverly Hills mansion after spending the day on the water. They ate dinner together, a scene so normal it could have been mistaken for the calm before a storm. Later, Jose and Kitty sat in the living room watching television. Lyall and Eric left the house, but not for long. They drove around in their black Mercedes, circling the neighborhood, nervous, waiting for the moment. And then, just after 10 p.m., they returned. Armed with two 12-gauge shotguns, they entered the house. What followed was an eruption of violence that even seasoned detectives would later describe as beyond comprehension. Jose Menendez was hit first. The blast tore into him with devastating force, killing him almost instantly. Kitty, startled and terrified, tried to run, but the brothers followed her. She screamed, stumbled, fell. They shot again and again, as though in a frenzy. When it was over, Jose was slumped on the couch, lifeless, his once commanding figure reduced to silence. Kitty lay on the floor, her body riddled with wounds, her face nearly unrecognizable. The walls of the mansion dripped with blood, the carpet soaked through. And then, in an act of cold calculation, the brothers staged their alibi. They drove off, tossed their weapons on Mulholland Drive, and headed for the movies. Later, they returned home and dialed 911. Eric's voice on the call was frantic, trembling, almost hysterical. "Somebody killed my parents." The operator tried to calm him, but the horror in his tone sent officers racing to the Menendez mansion. When they arrived, they found the two brothers outside, seemingly devastated. Neighbors watched as police cordoned off the property, believing a mafia hit or a burglary gone wrong had just torn apart one of Beverly Hills' wealthiest families. In the days that followed, Lyall and Eric played their roles well. They cried during interviews, leaned on friends, and spoke about their loss. But while police investigated every possible lead, from business rivals to organized crime, something about the brothers' behavior seemed off. Instead of retreating in grief, they dove headfirst into spending. They bought Rolex watches, luxury cars, and expensive clothes. Lyall invested in a restaurant, Eric in a personal tennis coach. They lived like heirs to a fortune, flaunting their wealth in a way that made detectives uneasy. Still, the case stalled. With no murder weapons recovered and no clear motive, investigators struggled. But the cracks began to show when Eric, weighed down by guilt, confided in his therapist, Dr. Jerome Oziel. During one session, Eric admitted the unthinkable. He and his brother had killed their parents. Oziel's mistress, overhearing parts of these confessions, became frightened and eventually tipped off authorities. The police suddenly had the break they'd been waiting for. But this wasn't a simple open and shut case. When the brothers were arrested, their defense unveiled a shocking twist. They claimed the murders weren't driven by greed, but by years of abuse. Eric and Lyall alleged that their father had been physically and sexually abusive, that their mother turned a blind eye, and that the killings were acts of desperate self-defense after years of torment. The defense painted a picture of two young men trapped in a gilded prison, their only escape through violence. The courtroom became a theater of anguish and controversy. Prosecutors argued the brothers were spoiled, greedy brats who slaughtered their parents to inherit millions. The defense countered with chilling testimony of abuse and fear, forcing the jury to consider whether these young men were cold-blooded killers or long-suffering victims. For months, the world watched, transfixed. Court TV broadcast every tear, every gasp, every moment of testimony. Millions of Americans debated the case at dinner tables and in workplaces. Were the Menendez brothers monsters, or victims who snapped under unbearable pressure? At one point, Eric himself took the stand, his voice breaking as he described years of alleged abuse. His words cut through the silence of the courtroom, painting his father as a tyrant, his mother as complicit. "We were terrified," he said. "We believed he was going to kill us." But the prosecution tore into these claims, pointing to the lavish spending spree that followed the murders. To them, this wasn't fear, this was greed. This was entitlement. After 2 lengthy trials and years of legal battles, the verdict finally came in 1996. Both brothers were found guilty of first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit murder. The judge sentenced them to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The gavel AS echo in that courtroom was the final punctuation on a story that had gripped America for nearly a decade. Even today, the Menendez case continues to stir debate. Were they calculating killers or broken sons pushed past the breaking point? The truth may lie somewhere between horror and tragedy, forever blurred by blood and memory. But one thing is certain: the night of August 20th, 1989, shattered not only a family but the illusion of safety inside America's wealthiest neighborhoods. The story of Lyall and Eric Menendez remains one of the most chilling examples of patricide in modern history. It is a tale of privilege corrupted, of secrets festering in silence, and of violence exploding within the walls of a mansion that was supposed to symbolize success. The Menendez brothers didn't just kill their parents. They killed the image of the perfect family, revealing that behind the gates of wealth, darkness can thrive as easily as anywhere else. And so, as the prison doors close behind them, the world is left to wonder, not just why they did it, but what it says about the fragile line between victim and villain, privilege and despair, family and betrayal. They pulled the trigger. They rewrote their family's legacy in blood, and the echo of those gunshots still lingers in Beverly Hills. If stories like this keep you hooked, hit subscribe for more.